Viv has worked as a business executive and a community leader in corporate, community and government activities and agencies, applying her business knowledge, financial and technical knowledge to assist community organizations advance their social objectives. Viv has held roles at the Choice, Financial Service, AMPSS Management, and ANZ Banking Group. Viv also led the peak body of the Vietnamese community in Australia Victoria chapter. Viv has approved, well, Viv was appointed as chairperson of the VMC in August 2019 and done a great job. I personally know she's very friendly and very approachable to all communities. And now I would like to invite Viv to give us give a small talk speech to our group. Thanks, Viv. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Sethi, and also to Deputy Mayor, Councillor Tina Samadiaj. I hope I had a go at it. Good evening, and let me start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we are gathered for this gathering and pay my respect to the elders past and present. And I pay respect to the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation where I live and pay my respect to the elders past and present. Thank you, Sidi, for having me join you here tonight at the Monash Interfaith Group. And I also want to do a big shout out to Mohammed Mohadeen, Commissioner of the Victorian Multicultural Commission, who is doing a much better job than I am on at least certainly on the interfaith space. In the interfaith space, I consider myself as a toddler in comparison to Brother Mohammed, and it is something that I need to get to know a lot more in my role to support community harmony, social cohesion, and mutual respect. I won't have anything like Julian Burnside QC or any of your previous keynote speakers in terms of inspiring you or giving you anything that I would say food for thought. But I'm going to have a go at, based on what you've asked me to do, I'll have a bit of a chat spiel about the Victorian Multicultural Commission, what we do, what I think. Obviously, it's a biased view, the impact that the Victorian Multicultural Commission has on the community, and also what some of my observations around what organizations like MIG could do in either support of the VMC's objectives and or the broader agendas around social cohesion, religious harmony, and the foundations of our multicultural society, and that's multiculturalism. I'm sure many of you would know about the Victorian Multicultural Commission. There are many things in the Multicultural Act Victoria that spells out what the VMC does. Like many other organizations, that we are bound by the resources we have available and the priorities of the time between the Commission and the Minister for Multicultural Affairs, to whom I report. The Victorian Multicultural Commission may have been known to you more as a celebratory type organizations and events like the Multicultural Awards for Excellence or the Multicultural Gala Dinner that takes place during the Cultural Diversity Week in March. You may have heard of us or have been involved with the VMC. You may also have been involved with us through the Regional Advisory Councils and or the Multi-Faith Advisory Group. Those are channels that are formal, if you like, where the Commission engages with the multicultural and multi-faith communities. The pandemic, however, has changed our activities and our priorities in a very significant way, and that is more around advocacy within government departments to ensure that the challenges that communities share with us are appropriately directed to the right places and also adequately considered. And that's a much bigger challenge, in my humble opinion, because the legislation does not allow me or doesn't compel, I don't have powers to compel departments to undertake activities like co-design, like setting targets or making sure that the engagement efforts from the departments are done adequately and on an ongoing basis. Nevertheless, the collective efforts of the multicultural and multi-faith communities over the last couple of years during what is a 1 in a 100 year event or pandemic has meant that we know that when we work together and when we come together, we are far more productive, far more effective, and far more stronger. You could also see the difference in the way in which we responded right at the beginning of the pandemic, where there was no government policies, both at the federal or state levels, for non-documented members of the community, for international students, or for people on temporary visas. But the communities just rolled up our sleeves, did what we had to do, whether it be food relief, accommodation, reaching out for conversations, care, support, all of those things we did before policies came into place from different levels of government. And even when policies came into place, even when funding supports were provided to whether that be local governments or food relief agencies that weren't necessarily adequate for our cultural and or religious requirements, the community still continued to do the work. And that to me is a testament of we are indeed far more effective and stronger together. And organizations like the Monash Interfaith Group plays an important role in that, because there is no way the government departments would be able to reach the grassroots communities like they have been able to, and they have been able to because of the work that organizations like MIG and many others are and have been doing. And many of you on this call tonight are indeed leaders in organizations or trusted community leaders or members of your community where you were able to play an important part that the Premier couldn't, the Chief Health Officer couldn't, and or the secretaries of departments couldn't. So that's a significant shift for the VMC and will continue to be that way for as long as I am in this role, because I fundamentally believe our unique value proposition is knowing about the communities, is understanding about the challenges, and is being able to channel the issues to the right places for change to occur. I appreciate that it does take a bit of time. In fact, it might be takes too long for some of us. However, to me, I liken it to, I suppose, in my experience, when I left the country, I left Vietnam on a little boat. We had 57 on what was a very small boat, and it didn't take a lot to steer it or to change directions. But for government, it's like Queen Mary. So it takes a lot to change course, but when it does, the impact is far more powerful. And for that, it requires a little bit of patience and resilience and collaborative support and efforts from all of us to try and steer the ship for it to change course, to make it more inclusive, more collaborative, and more recognized of the little voices and every voice in our community. So that's a little bit about us, and you can form a view as to whether or not we are making an impact or making a contribution in the broader community. A matter that I feel really humbled but proud is the fact that the VMC can put a spotlight on very small organizations, very small communities that we have never heard of, has never received any funding supports from government, but are now able to find their place in our multicultural, multi-faith society. And there are many more examples of that. So let me now turn to what I think, or some of my observations around the likes of MIG could do to support the VMC's agenda and or the broader priorities of social cohesion and harmony, religious harmony. I think one thing that organizations like yours can do is support people, grassroots members of our community, understand better about rights and responsibilities, understand better about civic engagement, understand better the way in which societies like our democratic system structure works, different levels of governments, philanthropic sector, the NGOs, all different parties, if you like, that make up our wonderful, democratic, multicultural, multi-faith community, where everybody can feel safe in their home, in their society, in their community, and out on the street, feel empowered to participate, and also feel responsible to make that contribution in this to this society. So to me, knowing my rights, knowing my obligations is important, so that I know when I have an issue, I know where to go, and I know that I'm talking to the right place or the right people. Knowing my responsibilities means that I can have my freedom of speech, but I also need to recognize that what I say can impact others in an adverse way. So there are my rights and there are my responsibilities. My being and you know, the multi-faith and multicultural communities are so deeply engaged, if you like, in civic engagement or community service. We do so much for the community. We don't even, if I think if we do count the volunteering hours that community members do, whether it be at their gurdwara, their temple, their synagogue, their mosque, their church, if we count that as volunteering hours, we would have billions every year, even counted at $25 an hour. But we don't do that. And, you know, survey after survey in volunteering suggests that we don't count those that as volunteering. We do that because we know that that's what we have to do to support our faith, our family, our community, or whatever the reason might be. And the other thing that I think organizations like MIG can do is to support the understanding of and the flow on impacts of what happens overseas, particularly when it comes to religious matters that can happen, that does happen overseas and can have an adverse impact here in Victoria if leadership isn't there, or if understanding of cohesion, of respect, and of collaboration is reduces. And there is no doubt that events overseas impact us and impact our multicultural communities. What I think grassroots leadership can do, and organizations like yours can, is to help us understand those issues more broadly and take into account and into consideration the way in which we live here in this state and in this country, and work through collectively and respectfully how those issues, the adverse impact of those global events can be minimized here in Victoria. We have, as you know, 200 plus languages, 200 plus ethnic groups, 130 plus faiths. These stats you hear all the time from members of parliament when they speak at community events. This diversity doesn't happen unless there is ongoing work behind the scene, and that's the sort of things that you do individually, collectively, or under the banner of this organization. I thank you for the opportunity to speak with you and to share with you my thoughts. I express my gratitude for the work that you do as a community leader, a faith leader, or as members, executive members, or members of this organization, because I know without these activities, without those efforts, you don't need anyone to remind you, you don't need anyone to request of you to do that. You do that because you believe in the cohesive and harmonious society that we have here. And I thank you very much for doing that and continuing to do so, without which I worry about the social fabrics of our society. But I have every confidence that we always have and will always remain one of the most livable states and one of the most diverse states. And all of that is a feather to our hat. I think that's it. That's where the expression goes, rather than worrying about too much diversity and therefore we should stop people from coming to Victoria. We should have less of this and we all should be behaving in exactly the same way. So on that note, thank you very much once again for having me.
Thank you, Vivienne. What a beautiful story yours is. Coming in a boat and sky is the limit and you have reached the top and doing an excellent job for the Victorians. Also, thanks for acknowledging the work done by volunteers. We are all volunteers, and also advising us to empower the grassroots level a bit more and explain what interfaith is to the grassroots level. We're trying our best, but I think we can do even better. I will now open to Q&A and ask Kamla to do that. She's the expert in that field. So over to you, Kamla. If anybody has questions, Kamla will take over from here.
All right. Yes. Well said, Vivienne. Actually, we are sort of so fortunate in having Vivienne to address us today, and I'm really overjoyed to know exactly what the VMC is doing to support the multicultural community, particularly in times of hardship, and all the advice that she has given to MIG, all the suggestions she has given. I'm sure we'll try our best to see what we can take up and carry forward to bring the community together. So we are now open for, and thank you, Vivienne. We are open to questions, and I'm sure there's some members over there who will be dying to ask some questions, or perhaps add on to what Vivienne has said. Please, if you can put your hand up, either electronically or you can just raise your hand. So I should be able to ask you to. Yes,
and
Heather.
please, I would also like to just to add, please be respectful in the questions you ask.
Heather, go ahead, Heather. Unmute yourself, Heather.
Thank you, Vivienne. I'd just be interested to know how many people you have involved with your work to be initiating things without government leadership was fantastic. Is your team big? How does it work?
Well, thank you, Heather. We have 12 commissioners, the chairperson, and what's called an executive chairperson, me, and I work in the role full time. We have a deputy commissioner, Waitei, who is known to many of you, and he works 3 days a week. And then we have 10 other commissioners, one of whom is Muhammad Mahadin on the call tonight, who are what I would describe as board members. And the 10 commissioners, 8 of whom have responsibility for each of the 8 regional advisory councils. So their role is to get to know members in their RAC, understand their issues, and support their advocacy across all sorts of platforms. We have 14 staff members divided into the engagement team whose function is to support the commissioners. So that's 10 of us running around trying to do stuff, making sure they've got an event brief, they got a speech if they need to, and that they have RSVP'd to a particular invitation that we receive. And we have monthly meetings, so that's their function, to support all of the papers and making sure that the commissioners are fully briefed and so on and so forth. And the other function that they do is support the regional advisory councils. And then we have the other team called Comms and Events, whose job it is to what I'd call strengthen the communities and amplify and elevate the community's voices and efforts through the Gala Dinner, through recognition awards like the Honor Roll, like the Refugee Awards, and like the Multicultural Excellence Awards, and then everything else you see. So that's 14 people.
Thank you. And I learned from Mohammed that you're an AM, which is even higher than an OAM. So well done. To think that a boat girl has just done so much. So well done.
That's good. Thank you, Heather. Lucky, you have your hand up. Unmute yourself, Lucky. You are muted. Can you unmute yourself? Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. I'm just want to inquiring because Multicultural Commission give grant to event and festival, but many of us working at the media, ethnic media, we hardly got the grant. So how can we apply for that? Thank you.
Lucky, grants is not something that I am involved in. Grants are assessed under the portfolio of for multicultural affairs under the minister. ethnic media, I have to say, hasn't been as well supported, in my humble opinion. And I think it's because during the pandemic, we ethnic media are not considered, for whatever reason, part of the mainstream. So you wouldn't see an ethnic like whether it be a Greek newspaper or an Italian magazine or a Chinese media outlet or an Indian media outlet be part of the Premier's daily press conferences. They're not part of that. It has been raised. There's been some real challenges about that. The Minister for Multicultural Affairs has recognized that. So she's provided some funding towards the media, the multicultural medias, and engaged them in providing COVID-19 messages and things of that nature. I think the ethnic media could do a bit more in organizing ourselves or themselves into some sort of a structure. You know how the mainstream media, they've got their union, they've got their peak body, and you know, that kind of structure might be able to assist in the collective advocacy, because sometimes when we advocate for our own kind of patch, and the funding body looks at it and say, well, you know, they're only reaching 1,000 people, they're not reaching 100,000 people. So there's that sort of numbers game, if you like, behind the scene. So I think there a bit more organization on the ethnic media is one thing that I would think is something to consider, but also greater advocacy on our part too, I have to say, to make sure that the government recognizes the role of ethnic media. And they're doing that a bit more now. It's not as coordinated as we would like to see.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right, this is your chance. You can raise your hand if you anyone else has got anything to say.
Jimmy has the hand up.
Yes, Jimmy. Go ahead.
Yeah, just Jimmy Lee here. I just want to take this opportunity to say thank you to the VMC led by Vivienne through the last more than 2.5 years in the pandemic. You know, we saw so many information sessions organized, so many help and support provided to the community. I just want to take this opportunity to thank you to Vivienne and Mohammed and others.
Thank you.
Anita has the hand up.
Anita.
Thank
Yes,
you.
Anita.
Thank you, Vivienne. A very stimulating presentation. I have a couple of questions. One is about volunteering. I think volunteering is such an important part of our society. However, I'm finding as a volunteer, I'm being asked to do so many checks. I've had 2 police checks to do for 2 different organisations. And I was wondering, is there anybody within your department that could perhaps put it to our ministers that 1 police check be done for all voluntary organisations that we work for, rather than having to have a different police check for each organisation. The other thing is too, I live in a multicultural community in Mulgrave, and I found as a volunteer for Neighbourhood Watch, I've been able to reach out to many people to bring them together to get to know each other. And I feel that we need to do more in our neighbourhoods to reach out, to make connections. And I found it does work if people have got the confidence to reach out and to help each other.
Thank you, Anita. I'll take your suggestion back to the department. I suspect that it's a bit bigger a problem than what you think. It sounds simple, doesn't it? But I am aware, for example, I was sitting in on a presentation a couple of nights ago by Deputy Chairperson Boitei with the Department of Justice and Community Safety about grants for to support children children and young adults on crime prevention. Now, there are child safety legislations that organizations have to comply with if they wanted to apply for grants, and they need to have insurance on child safety. So I think there are different legislations that might require certain things to be happening in the way that they are. However, I think it is worthwhile to raise it again, because I know when I was in the president of the Vietnamese community, we had the same issue, that somebody should be just giving it a bit of a go, asking a staff member, for, an employee to do a bit of a review and see what improvements, what efficiencies can be gained, because it is a bit annoying actually to have to try and apply for working for children 4 times. You've got 4 little cards in your wallet, notwithstanding your MyKey card and I don't know how many other cards we have in our wallet. So no, thank you for the feedback. In relation to connecting, totally. That response is also for me personally, as when I'm listening to you, Anita, I'm thinking, gee, I haven't been speaking to my neighbor for the last couple of weeks. So I think making that effort to reach out consciously, I think is really necessary and really important and fundamental to developing those connections, and therefore understanding and respect and mutual support for each other. And the same thing goes for multicultural communities too. And Mohammed is also a big fan of connecting different cultures, different faiths together, because through understanding and people-to-people connection, barriers can be broken down.
Great. Thank you, Vivienne. Mohammed, you can go next, and after Mohammed, we can have Stephen.
Thanks. Just to add to what Anita was asking about the police checks, a police check is valid for a certain period. I think it's about 3 years. So you can use the same police check for a number of organizations, but sometimes those checks are can be a different check. For child safety, there's a different check. So that might be the reason that you might be asked to do multiple checks. But a general police check is valid for 3 years, and you can use it across, because if you do it through a volunteer basis, it's paid for, it's free. So yeah, I've done that quite a few times. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Mohammed. Stephen, you had your hand up.
Yes, I've got a couple of points. Firstly, I just want to congratulate Vivienne, because since her term, I seems to be getting a lot of what they call monthly newsletter from her, bring us so much closer to the VMC. Firstly, I have that feeling compared to the past, right? Since Vivienne come on board, we seem to get a newsletter from which last one we got is just told us the VMC grant. That's how I pass on the information across. That's one. The other question I have is just like mentioned before at this annual general meeting, the public liability grant, public liability premium. All the interfaith group has to pay for it, and this year for MIG is going to be about last year $700-800. And can you imagine if they don't get grant from council? So I think the VMC or the Multicultural Commission, one of those departments should look at this public liability premium on behalf of this, particularly this group of interfaith group. Otherwise, it's an expense, which is putting pressure on the volunteer to fundraise instead of focusing on what they ought to do, harmony and and religious tolerance. So we need help from VMC or Multicultural Commission somehow to help us to fund the public liability premium. Thank you.
Stephen, I will take on board your suggestion and perhaps explore it internally a bit more, and then I could respond back through the chair of this organization with an update.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Joe.
There is a precedent. The Victorian Council of Churches has public liability to all the interchurch councils in Victoria. So we don't have to pay, we only pay a subscription of about $50 or $50 to $70 a year. And we're covered by any event we hold on interfaith or interchurch activities. So there is such a thing. So
Yeah.
but it's not on interfaith. That's
Stephen, you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I think what Joe is saying is correct. If you help the churches, and in my olden days, the Scouts has the public library for all the Scout group, was about 500-600 of them, and they just pay membership, and they are automatically covered for public library premium. And can we have that system within an interfaith movement as such? That's another possible solution, like what Joe said, you know.
Mohammed,
Thank you.
you still have.
Yes, just to, I think what I could do is take it back to the Faith Communities Council of Victoria, where the interfaith organizations are members. Maybe they could look at a public library that covers all interfaith organizations. So that's something, wearing my other hat as the deputy chair of the Faith Communities Council. So that's something I'll take back and come back to you on that. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. I cannot see any other hand over there. Sashi, I don't want to miss you this time. If you have anything to say, this is your chance. No? Anyone? Well, if there's nobody, I just want to make one final comment, Vivienne. When I was listening to you, I picked up this piece of information that you came in a bout. And you know, I feel so overwhelmed and feel so proud to sort of see you having reached the pinnacle of this association, Victorian Multicultural Commission, coming from as a boat person and reaching that particular position. Who would be in a better position to know the difficulties and the hardships that you know, the community who migrate from other country normally face in a new country? So what an achievement. And I think we put our heads off for you to be there to help the refugees and the you know, the multicultural community in trying to bring about the unity, harmony to all the people. So it's such great work you are doing, and we have been so fortunate in having you today, and I really have a lot of very high regard for you. So that's end of the questions and answers. I'll hand it back to the chairperson, Siti.